Okay, and we are live on LinkedIn as well. So I want to welcome everyone to our Career Masterclass. Topic today is how to get the best job search result from job boards. Our guest today is Carmen Bryant. Up until recently, is Director of U.S. Marketing at Indeed. Fortunate they have her here today. And I'll introduce Carmen in just a moment. But first, note about using the WebEx controls. Enter questions for her in the Q&A box, and we'll collect those and pass those on during the Q&A portion of presentation toward the end. You can chat to all panelists, but we may not be able to respond immediately as we'll be in conversation. We'll also have a few polls during the course of the presentation. So the first one is very straightforward. It's just how much work experience do you have? That'll give Carmen an appreciation for who's in the audience. Second part of the question is how you're doing today. We've been asking this throughout the course of the pandemic, just to check in on people, how they're dealing with surges coming and going and rising and falling. Give you about another 15 seconds to answer the question. Close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's the result. About half of our audience are people with more than 5 years of experience. And the rest are evenly distributed among people between college, university, up to 5 years of experience. So it's kind of a diverse audience today, and it's nice to see that about 90% of everybody said that they were doing well. We hope that what Carmen has to share with you today will improve your outlook if you're in that other 10%. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Carmen Bryant, who is the former Director of Marketing, U.S. Marketing at Indeed. She's held strategic insight positions for companies like NBC Universal, which is a major film and broadcasting company with global reach, and at many other top tier companies as well. And she's a graduate of Harvard University. So welcome, Carmen. Hold these.
And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to folks on the call, depending on where you're calling in from. I'm super excited to be here today. Just to give you a little bit more insight into my experience and perhaps why I'm here today is, as Stuart mentioned, I was most recently the head of US marketing at Indeed up until March. And like to think of myself as being a free agent right now and going, starting to look at opportunities like many of you on the call right now. And during my time there, I did an array of different things, but we, and myself included, felt very passionate about our mission of helping people to get jobs. And one of the things I did quite a bit was to go out and talk to companies about how to hire the best talent, as well as job seekers a bit. So it's exciting to be able to share some of that with you. And it was great for all of you to share kind of your experience with me. Stuart, I don't think I even mentioned that I'm actually getting over COVID right now.
Oh no, you didn't. I can almost hear a little touch of that in your voice.
Yeah. So I think I'm gonna say I'm doing pretty well, but definitely better than I was last week, and I'm very.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry to hear that. My daughter just got over a mild bout of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got a little cocky. I've been enjoying my time off. I was gallivanting all over New York City, which is where I'm based.
Mhm.
And so, here we are, but I'm quarantining and I'm healthy and whole for the most part and able to participate in this conversation.
And I see there are some good wishes for you to get well soon from the audience. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
um, so let's start off with a kind of a straightforward question, which is, what is the state of hiring right now?
Yeah, it's I think there's a few different ways you can look at sort of what's happening in hiring. One is to sort of look at, the Bureau of Labor statistics and see what are the metrics that are sort of like the indicators. And indeed, and a lot of this information is published publicly, so you can get access to it. And indeed, we were also able to look at our own platform data to
Mhm.
look at what was the volume of postings that we have, what is the search activity, to really kind of understand what's happening. And I say net is a pretty good time to be a job seeker right now. It is, we're in a place where demand for workers far outstrips worker readiness to accept roles. And while that's starting to modulate a little bit, we're seeing wage growth has really increased. So it's a pretty good time to be looking for opportunities. When we look at the job postings on our site. Actually, I think it would be interesting to get a pulse from the audience because
Okay.
we look at job postings on Indeed historically. And I think it would be great to sort of get a sense from the audience on maybe what they think the state of Indeed's postings are.
Okay. And we've got that poll up.
So I mentioned that, demand exceeds supply, and we can look at the number of postings on our site relative to pre-pandemic levels. So how far above pre-pandemic levels do you think Indeed's current job postings are? 15%, 35%, 55%, or 70%?
And got about 5 more seconds. And we'll close the poll. And here's what the audience thinks.
So the majority is a pretty diverse, 35%, about a quarter say either 55 or 15%, and 16% say 70%. The answer is actually 55%. So the job postings on Indeed are approximately 55% above our pre-pandemic levels. So we were seeing and continue to see that there's just so much demand for workers right now. So it's actually a pretty good time to be looking for opportunities.
Excellent. So what if someone's out there looking for opportunities, Indeed being one of them, what are the different kinds of tools that you can use when you're looking for a job, and what should you be using?
Yeah, you should be using probably as many of them as possible. But for sure, I have to talk about online job boards. And job boards, job aggregators, job search engines. Sometimes those are used interchangeably, and they are roughly, very similar. They're a place where companies go and post jobs online so that you can get access to new opportunities. You absolutely should be using online job boards. They are, probably right now the primary source of hiring from online, for online. But you also need to be thinking about, networking and, social networks, referrals. Referrals remain a huge way in which companies find talent.
Yeah.
I think it's important, when I go talk to organizations, one of the things I talk about is in order to make sure that you are finding a diverse range of potential candidates. You don't want to rely solely on referrals because you end up hiring people that are very similar to the people that you already have. But, 66% of employers still consider referrals to be a primary way to find talent. Job fairs, especially online. I think one of the things that the pandemic really did is it catalyzed innovation in the space. So there are a lot of companies, there are a lot of organizations like Indeed and others that are doing online job fairs so that you have the opportunity to find those kinds of roles as well. And if there are companies that you have your eye on, of course, go to their sites as well. So there's an array of different ways, but certainly you should be thinking about a mix of those different opportunity or those different resources to find the right opportunity.
When you talked about the pitfalls of referrals and leading to a company of all the people being the same, there's an old quote from David Ogilvy, who was the founder of Ogilvy and Mathers, one of the greatest advertising agencies of the 20th century. And what he would do is when he hired someone new, he would send them a Russian nesting doll. You open the doll and there's another doll, and you open the doll, and you get to the final doll inside, there was like a Chinese fortune cookie fortune, and it said, if we hire people lesser than ourselves, we will become a company of midgets. If we hire people greater than ourselves, we will become a company of giants. So that was a kind of a notion about, the dangers of referrals being just, oh, this is a great guy or the great woman. It's really you still have to be looking for top talent when you're hiring. So the flip side of that for our job seekers today on this call is, you need to be recognized as top talent. Yeah.
Absolutely. I always used to tell people I got my job at Indeed on Indeed.
Uh-huh.
And I met someone, Glassdoor was a sister company. And there was someone at Glassdoor was like, I got my job at Glassdoor on Glassdoor. So it really goes to show that, it really does kind of democratize access and opportunity
Mm-hmm.
for folks. So it's really important, I think, to try to leverage it as much as possible.
Okay. So when we look at job boards as one of the tools, what are the benefits of job boards to job seekers?
Yeah, I think there are some obvious ones, right? Like there's tons of opportunities. So you can go to presumably one or maybe just a handful of destinations to find um, really a wide range of potential roles. You're also going to be exposed to what the latest opportunities are. And I can talk a little bit more, and I'll talk a little bit more about Indeed in a bit, but I know on Indeed, you can kind of prioritize opportunities based on date, or we would sort of add additional visibility or share the roles that were posted and their posting date, just so you could get a sense of, what those opportunities are.
Okay.
I think one of the ways in which job boards, I think, can be leveraged even more, that they probably aren't as much, is for research.
Okay.
Because there's such a wide variety of different roles. So it can include, researching companies for sure. Most have, very extensive research on all the different companies, especially if they're large enterprise organizations.
Uh-huh.
Um, they have them sort of, they have their information on the site, but you can also research the types of jobs that you might be interested in. If you think you're interested in, being a marketing analyst or a developer or, whatever the case may be, you can go and start to look at job descriptions and understand, what are the requirements for the role? What are organizations looking for?
Mm-hmm.
What is the gap between what I have and maybe what these companies are looking for? So I think leveraging them for research is a really important benefit to using. a job board. You can also automate your search. Once you've gotten to a place where you sort of have an idea of what you're looking for and you've started to test it and get a sense of, yes, I'm getting the right type of response now, you can automate that job search so that jobs are coming to you
Mhm.
proactively rather than you having to go to the job board. And the same thing goes for the application process. Indeed, for example, has an easy apply option so that you can fairly easily apply to roles through the
Oh, okay.
platform. And many other platforms do as well. So those are some of the benefits, I think, of using an online job board.
And just to be clear, because we had a question from the audience, job board is a industry term for an online job listing, job search um, platform, and it's not specific to Indeed or Glassdoor or any of the other individual platforms, right?
Correct. It's an industry term, and um, you know, so there are platforms like Glassdoor that might be known a little bit more for reviews, but they also
Uh,
have a job board component. Similarly for LinkedIn, they're known more, I would say, as more of a professional social networking and content site, but there is a job board component. But also some of the historical sort of job board, I shouldn't say historical, they still exist, but like Career Builder, um, which are kind of the more traditional sort of ways that we think of job boards.
hmm and a number of people in our audience are in India. There are a number of India country specific job boards or job boards that started and are based in India that have moved global. So it's
Naukri, I
it's a,
know Naukri, yeah. So
ah,
that's a big player in India as well, and I believe they are like expanding globally.
yeah, it's pretty amazing. Simplilearn is a company that's based in Bangalore. We're not a job board. We're an education platform, and but we're expanding globally as well. And it's pretty amazing what the technology opportunities are.
It
Um,
really has. So if anything, I think the pandemic in a lot of ways also made the world, it made it both smaller and larger. People were separated and unable to get home, but with everybody working remotely, all of a sudden, we are, it
yeah,
really kind of made it clear how to work in a global sort of economy.
exactly. Um, so you talked about the advantages of using a job board. What should people look out for? What are the kinds of pitfalls that can happen when they start a job board? Using job boards for their job search. What should they be wary of?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and this might be a little bit more relevant for the folks that are, have a bit more experience, but I think you have to be cognizant of the fact that job boards are listing the latest opportunities. But as we know, there are opportunities that are arising constantly that
hmm
have yet to be posted. And so you want to be conscious of the fact that, and certainly for maybe some senior level positions, or as you go up in experience, it's important to continue to build your network and think about referrals, because it really will enable you to have insight into opportunities that are, not even on the job boards yet.
Yep.
Um, so I think that's important. I think the other thing too to consider is to sort of understand a bit of how search works and how these different job boards serve up content to you. So I'll talk a little bit about Indeed,
Okay.
and I'll share a little bit about some, personal experience. So Indeed is a job search engine. It has an algorithm that really enables the platform to serve up the jobs that are the most relevant to you, often based on what you searched for previously.
Okay.
So if you are someone who's really junior in your career and you don't really know what you want to do, and this is an actual sort of, real data point, they have a tendency to put blank like in Indeed, the search engine is a what and where box. What do you want to do and where do you want to do it? People would often leave the what box blank and then put in New York City for the where box or Bangalore, India for the where box. Now, because of the algorithm, we know that that tends to be people that are more junior. And so therefore, they are probably going to be served up jobs like customer service rep or retail sales
Mhm.
associate. But we also know that sometimes people at really senior levels of the organization might do that as well. So if they are in the C-suite level, because they've kind of gotten to a certain place in their career, and maybe they're not necessarily looking exclusively for a CEO job, but they're trying to find a senior level position in a certain market. Um, hopefully that executive has been engaging with that platform before, so they would have a
Yep.
sense of what they're sort of like doing. But if it defaults, right, it could serve up, potentially some opportunities that are not what you're interested in. So I think it's just really important to keep in mind that on Indeed, it's going to be based on your activity on that site.
I was just going to comment on that is that uh, this is something that's more prevalent from years past, but sometimes you have senior executives who haven't been in the job market per se for a while,
Hmm.
and they're not really familiar with how a job board works. And so it's kind of like, what am I going to do here? And like you said, if you put in blank, assuming that you're going to get all of the potential jobs that are suited to you, you're not really using that platform properly because it doesn't necessarily know that you spent 20 years as the chief operating officer or CEO of a company. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's a big thing. I
If
mean,
you've been helping someone else search for a job, right? I mean, there could be some reasons or rationale as to why, or you're deciding to change careers. Now, granted, you have the what box, but you might need to spend a little bit more time being more thoughtful initially to think about how do I want to sort of build this query. Recently, I learned similarly on LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a ton of information, right, about you. It has your network. It has if you're posting content. So LinkedIn tends to serve up jobs and content, but jobs and content where it is there. It's when it's connected to people in your network.
yeah,
So if you have if you work in tech and you're interested in going into a different industry altogether, you're going to need to sort of acknowledge the fact that you might be getting opportunities served up that are more aligned to your current network because those are all of the connections that you have.
yeah,
So I think it's important to understand just a little bit of how search works and how the algorithms, generally speaking, are being used and to take that into consideration on your behavior on the platform or in doing your job search.
that makes sense because you don't want to have the job board itself, the algorithms, pigeonhole you um, unreasonably. I mean, it's great if it's looking at your skills, your network, your experience, and saying this is a great job for you based on all of that. But um, then if you're if you're really looking to pivot to a new field, and a lot of the people who work with or come to Simplilearn are looking to pivot into a new technology or a new field, you don't want to let the algorithm restrict you or act as a gatekeeper to block you out of that.
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn fairly often, and so I've spent 6 years in tech, but I also spend a decent amount of time in media. And I was just sort of curious as to why like so much of my content and interactions are in the tech space as opposed to media. And that's what I came to understand.
Yeah,
So for sure, be thoughtful about that and sort of understand that.
yeah. Can you kind of discuss with the audience what are some of the best practices that they should use when they're going to Indeed or any of the other job boards? What are the steps they should take and the things they should be mindful of to get the best result?
Sure, and I'll lean a little bit more heavily on Indeed because that's where my experience sort of lies. But I would imagine that this is applicable for many different types of job boards. The first thing is to create an account. I mean, I know that sounds like a kind of like a no-brainer, but that is one, how they start to build a profile on who you are. Often, I know on Indeed, for example, we're not capturing like demographic information. It's your name and an email address.
Right,
So you don't have to worry about too much of that information being out there. But as you start to um, sort of have different activity on the site, you'll start to see that your job results come back a little bit more personalized. You also will have an opportunity to get typically free personalized resources as a result of that. And I know for sure on Indeed, there are resources that exist for job seekers that are for free. Similarly for LinkedIn. So, creating an account, creating that's the first step, setting up your profile, or your resume, depending on, what site you're on. You want to make sure that you're doing that. On Indeed, one of the things to understand when you create and upload your resume is that you're going to have two different options. You can set it to private or you can set it to public.
right.
And that is because there is, we want to make sure that we are protecting job seekers' privacy. So if you set it to private, you'll have it on the site. If you want to easily apply to a role with one click, you can do that. But no one will be able to search your resume. If you set it to public, that means that when recruiters or companies are looking for talent and they go and they search, for software developers in San Francisco, then you will come up in their search results. Now, even with that, on Indeed, for example, your contact information is not provided because often on our resume, our contact information is, included. So they will reach out to you, and essentially what Indeed will do is broker a communication. Once you say yes, that is when that recruiter or hiring manager is given your contact information and can contact you. And there are a lot of ways that Indeed really tries to promote thoughtful, curated messages because we want people to respond, even if the response is negative,
Yep.
right? So that, the same way we don't want companies to leave job seekers kind of in a black hole. We want to sort of ensure that, job seekers are getting an outreach that, compels them to respond, even if the response is, no, thank you. Um, so that's something else to take note of. The other thing I would say is, we often tell people to think like an employer when they are, looking for job opportunities. And I think that this is when the research can really come into play. If you are looking for a retail sales associate job, right? You probably want to make sure that it's communicated that you live close by or that it won't be a problem for you to sort of get to wherever it is you're going.
Yep.
If you are a registered nurse and the role is for, an ER nurse, right? Be really explicit about that in your job search so that you are pulling up those opportunities. So really think about the filters and the different ways that you can hone in on your search so that you can make it as relevant to you as possible, but also to the employer. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And kind of along those same lines is, think about how to highlight your skills, any, upskilling that you've done, any assessments that you've taken. Indeed has a plethora of assessments. I know Simply Learn, of course, is an educational platform, so you're providing ways for people to sort of educate themselves.
Mhm.
Another way to make yourself stand out from the crowd, because I think one of the things that most organizations are looking for, I would imagine, this is somewhat of a blanket statement, but people who are self motivated and curious.
Right.
And when you are sort of, making an effort to continue to hone your skills and do assessment, that certainly suggests that, you are someone who is self-motivated and curious, especially in a remote world. I used to be a hiring manager and I had people who were in office before the pandemic,
Yeah.
people who were in office versus people who were, remote and in the field. And now everybody is. But during that time, I learned a lot about, what it means for someone to be sort of self-motivated and self-directed and proactive. And it's really important, I think, in a remote world to be able to really demonstrate that.
Yeah,
Uh,
there used to be something called management by walking around, which
mm,
was a term that got popularized in the 1980s from the book Practices of yeah, the the exact title escapes me, but it was a very famous management book. But one of the things was management by walking around, where if you're a manager, you should walk through the areas where your employees work and not just sit in your office because you'll pick up a lot of information.
yeah,
Problem in the post-pandemic world is you can't walk around. I
you
mean,
can't walk
you,
around.
yeah, you can't just kind of look over the shoulder of somebody who's working at home because they control that interaction. And so um, you really have to, like you said, look for people. And if you're an employee, to be a person who demonstrates that they take responsibility for their own work, that they direct a lot of their own activity, that if they're given a task, they pursue it and don't need to be monitored closely. So, because those opportunities for managers to do those things are much less than they were in the pre-pandemic world.
Yeah, and along those lines and the conversations that, I would have with companies, there was definitely an increased interest on sort of like some of those soft skills, right? Like
Hmm.
obviously to have those hard skills typically is, we want to be able to sort of have someone, if you're a software developer, you have to be able to code. Like those are things that
Yeah,
are just must-haves. But some of those soft skills that, you and I are talking about the way in which you actually do your work, often is harder to assess. And so being able to demonstrate that in an objective way
yeah,
is really important. And we heard so many companies say like I can no longer manage output, right? It's not just about like you have to do 70 sales calls in a week. It had to be based on impact or a body of work, right? Not just activity. So that is changing a bit of how organizations are trying to find talent. I think it's important for job seekers to understand that
hmm
for sure.
um, one thing I'll tell a story on myself. One thing you need to be aware of when you're using job boards is what happens after you get a job, because I had actually found a job. This current position was Simplilearn through a job board, and um, I had been working several months, and everything was going great. And my boss, my local boss, happens to be two levels above me in the organization, called me up and I said, I have a question for you. Are you looking for another job? And I said, no, I'm extremely happy here. Um, well, you're on a job board somewhere. It's like, oh, I'd forgotten to take down that listing. So it's one of those things is that you do want to be, careful that you practice, good hygiene, so to speak, and cut down that job search when you're done with it and put it on a different level. If you're interested, I mean, one of the things that job boards can do, as you've pointed out, is they can leave your information out there in a way that employers can notify you through the job board about opportunities you hadn't heard of or you weren't actually looking for, and you might be interested in one of those. So you might not want to say, okay, I'm not looking, I don't want any contact at all. You might want to get those notifications, but you want to do it in a way that your current employer doesn't think you're still looking for another job, right?
Yeah. No, that's so true. And our some of the research that I did at Indeed, we found that most people leave a job when they are either disillusioned with their current sort of opportunity, or B, when they're inspired by a new opportunity. And a big source of that inspiration would come from, people who set up job alerts, got a
Mhm.
job, forgot about it, and then all of a sudden this opportunity appears in their inbox, or they get outreach from someone, and there's this new opportunity. So it can be nice, as you said, to have that, so that you are sort of staying abreast of what's happening. But it can also result in, I have to say the same thing happened to me. It wasn't so much my employer, but I would get calls for jobs that I think I would have been qualified for like 10 years ago or 5
Oh
years ago.
yeah.
And it's like, why are you asking about this now? I posted my resume like years ago.
Hmm.
So that's another reason to practice, really good hygiene. Um, I'll also just sort of like reiterate again the importance of understanding, keywords and how to use those. So when you go and you research companies, and you are interested in, say a software engineering role, or I'll say marketing because that's close to me. You're interested in a marketing manager role, and you go and you look at the different profiles and you notice, or job descriptions, that you notice that digital marketing is something that's really important. Or they want to know, a lot of people are asking if you know about Google AdWords, or if you have
Hmm.
experience with CRMs. Um, you want to take those keywords that are drivers of those job descriptions and incorporate them into your resumes, because when recruiters are screening for resumes, they are likely going to be doing it, with an eye to what the needs for that role is. So I'm gonna like do our second poll here, because I think it would be interesting to sort of get a take from people on what is the average amount of time a recruiter spends screening a resume.
Pardon me.
Is it 7 seconds, 33 seconds, 2 minutes, or 5 minutes?
Take a look. And we'll give you about another 5 seconds. Here is the result.
Okay. About 40% say 7, 32, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Well, you are correct. They spend 7 seconds screening your resume. Now, it's important that I use the word screening, but this is the part of the process when they've posted that job description. they are starting to get resumes, and they are trying to cut it down from what might be a larger number to a more manageable numbers of resumes that they know are going to be qualified. They're going to give each of those resumes about 7 seconds. So you want to make sure that you have, you know, like some key information included on that resume. Now, the hope, this might not always be the case, but the hope is that once they have it down to a more manageable number and they are starting to sort of potentially call people in for interviews or do a little bit more, in-depth sort of assessments, that they'll spend a little bit more time. But that initial screen is going to be 7 seconds. So make it as easy as possible for them to be able to decide that you are in fact the right candidate for that role.
I have a question relating to that. What's your take on the fact that that first screen may be occurring through an AI bot?
Yeah, that is an interesting point. I mean, I think in some ways, it might. I would think that a lot of it would still apply in a lot
Yeah.
of ways. So if you are a, software engineer, typically what happens, and, I am not an expert when it comes to AI, but typically what they're doing is like they're using sort of historical information to assess future sort of,
Yeah.
um, alignment, or whatever the right word is. So based on what they know to be true, which is that the software developers that we've hired in the past have these skills, they would use that to sort of determine whether or not your resume fit into that. Now, AI is interesting, and there's a whole area of AI called AI ethics.
Yes.
Really important because we know, garbage in, garbage out. Because if you are a company that has historically always hired people from Harvard University, for example, when a resume comes through that has Harvard University, it might pluck it out as being particularly relevant, when that obviously is not the sole indicator as to whether or not someone is in the role. So there's definitely a lot of consideration that companies are making, at least smart progressive companies are making, on how to ensure that the AI is actually doing the job that they need in terms of bringing highly qualified people into the fold, but not sort of extending existing bias.
Exactly. Exactly.
So I think that is a really interesting question. It is an interesting question that's being discussed, certainly in the world of, tech and HR tech in particular.
Mhm. Now you touched on a notion of extracting keywords from job descriptions and feeding those back into your resume. And one thing I would point out about that is you need to be sure that when you take that keyword, that it's something you know how to do before you put it into your resume.
Yes,
The
yes.
the and the but extension to that is if you notice that there's a job category that you're very interested in, and you keep seeing these keywords come up in the job descriptions, but you are not yet familiar with how to do that. One of the things you can do is to look to, a company like Simplilearn to gain that skill so that when you do add it to your resume, you can legitimately say, yes, I have been trained in this. I do have projects I've done that I can show you. So that's an aspect of making sure that your skills are up to date, making sure that their skills are wanted in the marketplace, and making sure that your skills are sharp, that when somebody says you must demonstrate it, that you're able to do that. Which leads to another question, which is, what are the most in-demand jobs now, and what are they projected to be in the next coming year or two?
Oh, sure. And Stuart, thank you so much for adding that. Yeah, please, use it as a guide, but be completely honest,
Yes.
and decide how to sort of like, hone your skills. It was interesting to me. Like, I thought this was, an important thing to talk about, as we talked about jobs. And, I'm going to go back to your earlier question about some of the pitfalls around job boards, because
Hmm.
as I started to do a bit of research around this, I noticed that depending on the job board you went to, you might get a slightly different answer. And I think that has to do with the folks that are coming to the site. So, taking that into consideration and looking around, and just sort of like my experience over the past 2 years, during the pandemic in particular, um, the areas that are in demand right now, there are a couple that are just, seem to be evergreen, right? So, engineering roles, developer roles, data scientist roles, those kind of technology roles are really in demand.
Uh-huh.
The interesting thing about them is that more and more companies are eliminating college degree requirements for those types of roles, because you can objectively, identify whether or not someone is good at coding.
Yes.
And, whether it's boot camps or assessments or other kinds of training programs that they do. So there's a great demand for that. And there's a lot of opportunity for someone, as we mentioned, who's self-motivated, to go in that arena, because, Indeed, for example, eliminated the college degree requirement for that.
Uh-huh.
Um, Not surprisingly, certainly here in the US, nurses and registered nurses are really hot and, you know, hard job. But for the people that I know who were in nursing during the pandemic and who were able to kind of persevere, there was certainly considerable sort of financial upside to
Yeah.
doing.
My,
Um,
my wife is a registered nurse and she works as a telephone triage nurse, which means she's working from home, answering questions on the telephone. But it's a short-staffed field, so she's doing very well financially. So,
Yeah, and it was, nursing was like that before the pandemic. It was
yep.
always a field in which there was not enough supply for the demand, and so the pandemic really just kind of exacerbated that.
Yeah.
And so along those lines, right now, not surprisingly, frontline workers. So things in the healthcare field, things in retail, truck drivers, certainly
Hmm.
in the States is really another big area of roles that are in demand. So I would say, technology and healthcare, again, exacerbated by the pandemic because people are working remote, things are moving online, and we need healthcare workers and we need frontline workers. Now, that doesn't mean that those are the only things. Like, interestingly, sales is an
Hmm.
area where there's a lot of need. Sales and kind of like customer service type roles. So there's a lot of demand in those spaces right now. When we think about sort of the future of jobs, I would think about, I would imagine technology is going to continue to be sort of an in-demand role. Healthcare, in addition to registered nurses, think about nurse instructors,
Hmm.
nurse practitioners,
Yes, absolutely.
anything that's going to help alleviate kind of the burdens that we're facing in the healthcare industry right now. Industries that are around climate change, are sort of like projected to be kind of increasingly important, whether it's roles that are around wind energy or solar energy, in an array of different fields. There are a number of people that I know that have gone to work for green energy companies.
Hmm.
Um, so, I think we'll continue to see many of the roles now that are in demand continue to be in demand, but also think about, climate change, mental health is going to be, I think, a pretty big field as well. There's so much more of a focus on mental well-being and workplace well-being. So I think there's going to be huge opportunities there.
Yeah, and especially as you mentioned, mental health, it's becoming a recognized crisis in a lot of environments and a lot of countries, that the stresses that we've been through in the pandemic have just aggravated the difficulties that people have had with mental health. So that's an area where there's going to be much more emphasis in spending and hiring. So
For
that's
sure.
a great catch.
I'd say this one last thing that I wanted to mention and forgot as we were researching companies, and I'll talk about Indeed here a bit too. When you research companies on Indeed, they are given a rating, and on a scale of like 1 to 5, I believe. And so if you go to Indeed and a company has a score of 4.3 or higher, that is considered really, really good. If a company has a 4, that's also good, but I'm just wanted to point that out. And then in 2020, we also launched a workplace well-being score. So you can also go and kind of see how a company is stacking up based on, stress level, trust, a sense of belonging, sense of diversity, like those kinds of things. So other things to keep in mind as you're researching and trying to get a sense potentially of what your overall well-being might be working at an organization.
Okay. I think this is an opportune time for us to move on to the Q&A. That's all right with you.
Absolutely.
So we've got a number of questions in from the audience, and we won't have time to take them all, but I do want to start off. Here's a question that I'm sure is on the mind of a number of people in our audience, which is how can a non-US resident get either a work permit to work in the US or access to remote work in the US?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, and I feel like it's a bit challenging because it's probably going to differ company by company. Now, in terms of, and I think the easiest route is probably to work remote for a company based in the US. And one way might be to see if it's an organization that has offices already
Mm-hmm.
in your country, because one of the challenges for US markets is often tax, for tax reasons. So they are, um, certainly some of the larger organizations are really strategic about making sure that they are hiring people in locations where they have, permission to do business and are paying taxes. So if they have employees of some sort operating in that country, then that sort of bodes well. The other thing that I would say is that more and more companies are starting to try to open their borders as much as possible. Now, some of that is, going to be within reason. Um, but I think just because of demand for talent, it's probably one of the better times in history, right, to be in this position. Um, so I would think if you have, a short list of companies that you're thinking about, kind of, researching them and understanding their approach to hiring, is another way to look at it. And then on a lot of sites, you can also search for remote anywhere in the world. Like it'll say remote in location, remote in the US, or remote anywhere in the world. And so that's another search term you can use when you are doing your search. So that's kind of the last bit of advice there.
And that answers SA's question, which is, do platforms limit users by geographic location? So, yeah,
Yeah,
so
I mean, some of them do, and so that's important because if you are searching for now, if you're searching for jobs, say in the US, you're going to be taken to the US platform. But if I want to go to the Canada platform, it's indeed.ca. Or if I want to go to the UK platform, it's indeed.co.uk.
yep.
So you might have to get a little clever, but I think you can do it. And I would still, in all of those situations, search, remote anywhere in the world.
Mhm. So you touched a little bit on the kinds of services that a job board can give to people who create an account, use that job board. And I'm wondering if this question relates to that. So Naveen has had a lot of interviews, but hasn't succeeded in getting that job. Is one of the services that Indeed provides, or job boards in general, is that help or pointing people to help with resume building, interview training, things like that? Where would they go for that?
Yes, to that question. So on Indeed, there's a site that's just career advice. And you can go and it will have examples of cover letters, examples of resumes. So you can kind of access information that way. Indeed also has an interview, not an interview, a resume review service,
Okay,
which is a fairly, nominal cost, but basically a professional will review your resume. And I think there's, a fairly maybe it's like I'm gonna mess up the number, so I don't want to say anything,
sure.
but it's a pretty, small amount of money. So you can leverage you know, written career advice. You can opt for this paid service. There's also Jobcast that Indeed does on like Facebook Live, where they will also go through a lot of this. LinkedIn, since I no longer work for Indeed, I can be as objective as possible. LinkedIn also has great resources in this capacity where they will, serve up, job interview questions and will do various trainings so that you can optimize, your resume and your interview
Yep.
skills.
Putting a plug in for Simplilearn, a number of our programs, not all of them, but a number of our programs include a job assist so
Mhm.
that the resume building, the interview training, and a job board membership are all included in that. We have a couple of programs that we're starting to do in technology, in software development, and in data science, where we've teamed up with a number of employers can actually offer a job guarantee to people who complete those programs. But those are new. Those only apply to a couple of fields so far. So, but uh, we've got. What would you offer to Gohain, who has an engineering background? He has an MBA, and he wants to pivot into blockchain and finance. So, what
Mm.
kind of a strategy? How can he use these search tools, these job search tools, to position himself into this new field?
Yeah, and I'll be really transparent. Blockchain and that is not my area of expertise.
Sure.
So this will be, advice that I would give to someone who is pivoting any career, which is to kind of leverage the process that we talked about, which is getting really clear on sort of what kind of the requirements are potentially for the role that you want to do. In this case, I would think a lot more about transferable skills and how what you've done is going to, one, yes, enable you to do the job, but two, bring a fresh perspective that is going to add value to the future of whatever organization that you're looking at. So I think in your case, it's going to be a mix of, yes, you want to make sure that you have the base level of requirements, and you might need to think about leveraging Simplilearn or, thinking about those transferable skills. But I think in your case, you're also gonna need to be proactive in writing your narrative,
Hmm.
because it's not just about, like, if I'm trying to go from a marketing director to a marketing director, the need to do that isn't as great. But if I'm going from, say, a marketing director to a sales director, then what I'm going to need to do is to be able to have a narrative as to why me in this role as a marketing director is going to be so beneficial to this role as a sales director, and it's going to help the future of this company, this role, or whatever the case may be. So get really clear on, another marketing word, what your value prop is, and your
Yeah,
uniqueness, I think, could be why you get the new opportunity.
yeah. And it's interesting in the specific case, you've got a candidate who's got an engineering background, so the technology, um, ability to pick up the technology aspects of blockchain should be fairly straightforward. An MBA background, so the ability to understand the finance domain should be fairly straightforward. So that should be a strong foundation for making that kind of a pivot. Um, Hari Haran from Tamil Nadu says that how can he research industry standard pay levels?
Yeah,
So what are some of the tools that are out there for looking at typical salaries, average salaries, that type of thing?
I mean, there is quite a move in the US for, salary transparency. So on Indeed, I'd say 80% of jobs have salaries attached to them. And there is an area where you can just go and search salaries. So Indeed is certainly a great source. That's the one that I'm most familiar with because I know that, so many of the roles do have salary attached. And it is becoming increasingly more common for, certain states to kind of legislate that it be provided. So, I would say start with Indeed. There's definitely a few others out there, but I know that Indeed, because it's so big, 250 million people come every month. And I think there's 1.5 million companies, hiring on Indeed at any given time.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of data.
Yeah,
So I do think it's a really good place to start.
yeah. And as opposed to, for example, LinkedIn has a lot of information about jobs, but it doesn't deal in salaries as much. So
Correct.
it might be better for different qualities of researching careers. Um, how important are premium accounts in online job boards? Is it valuable to pay for a premium account, or is that even something that happens on?
Well, that doesn't happen on Indeed. So for sure, you wouldn't need to pay unless I think the resume review service I mentioned is the first time we've ever done anything paid for the job seeker. So not the case. For LinkedIn, I mean, I think it really depends. I think the benefits of doing a premium account on LinkedIn is that it will enable you to reach out to people who you might not have a direct connection with.
That's right.
I think based on who you're trying to reach and, like if you are someone who maybe is trying to get into blockchain and you don't know a lot of people who are in that, maybe it is, a useful, you know, leverage of money, way to use money. But I think it really depends. But I think that's primarily the benefit.
And um, how would a fresher who's got just out of school, how would they get past that 7-second screening process? What are the tips that you'd offer somebody in that position to make sure that they get through that first barrier?
Yeah, I think it's two things. I think one is to research, like research the role you want, know what you want to do, know why you're good at it. So get tight on like what you're looking for. And then two, research the company and that role really, really well so that you can make sure that your resume is really built for the position that you're looking for. And presumably, if you are more junior in your career, you're going to be looking for opportunities that are more junior as well, So the competitive landscape should be, appropriate. But I think the research piece, because I think this idea of being able to send out a resume to 200 companies, you're never going to get noticed.
Yeah.
You need to get a little bit more strategic. And if you have to do 2 different resumes, 3 different resumes, so that they are more customized to the role and or industry you're interested in, that's what you have to do. But I think what separates people is really the research in terms of what they are trying to do.
So we're running a little over time. I don't want to keep you longer. And I do apologize to everyone whose questions we could not get to. But I'm going to move on to our last poll here. And this is a poll for our audience based on the interests you have. And just ask this question. So the 2 parts of the question are, what are the subjects or topics within technology that you might be interested in? So that's what Simplilearn does, is digital skills and related skills. And if you're interested in one or more of these topics, when do you want to start learning? So I'll leave that open for a few more seconds. And here's the result of the poll. So it's a pretty even distribution of all the different subject areas, with a little bit more of the audience interested in business and project management skills, and surprisingly fewer interested in software. And it's good to see about a third or more of the audience is interested in getting started right away. So we will talk a little bit about that, but what I wanted to do now is to point out some resources that Carmen has collected here for you. And I'm going to put the list here from the screen into the chat window so that folks can just copy and paste those and look at these at their leisure. So let me get that in here. And there in the chat window are these 3 resources that you can look at. There's also Carmen's LinkedIn, which I will also put into the chat window. And I want to thank you, Carmen, for being here today. I mean, this has been an excellent session, and a lot of people have said that they've learned a lot, and it's been helpful. And again, for the people whose questions we couldn't get to, I apologize, but we'll try to do some of those offline. But again, Carmen, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. And good luck to everyone. And I hope that you learned something. So hopefully we'll all get our dream jobs.
Right. Now I mentioned that we have the resources available to people, and one of the resources that Simplilearn offers is Skill Up, which is a free program. No charge for taking Skill Up courses. They're self-study, and they will give you certificates in different skills. So these are entry-level courses and things that'll act as a stepping stone to get you into new technology areas. And if you succeed at those, you might be interested in taking some of our more advanced courses with live virtual classrooms. But that link is in the chat window again. And I will also mention that tomorrow and Thursday we have additional webinars in our series. These happen to be topic specific or domain specific. One is on software engineering, which is a demonstration of how to use Angular and Spring Boot to build a HR application. And on Thursday, digital marketing on link building for digital marketing. So those are also in the chat window. The links will take you directly to the registration page. So with that bit of advertising done, I want to thank again Carmen and all of you in the audience for being here. I invite you to follow us on our social channels at Simplilearn at Facebook and Twitter, Simplilearn on LinkedIn. And we hope to see you at future Simplilearn webinars, and we would love to welcome you into the Simplilearn learning community. So good luck to everybody. Thank you.